get on with the talk. This is the fantastic Dr. Mike.
Welcome. Yeah, I'm actually recently retired, so I can break all the rules and talk about anything now without being told off by the GMC. Basically, I've got down here, who am I? Well, that's the subject of a whole other talk. I could talk for another hour on that, but yeah, basically, I've got a strong interest, always have had in alternative medicine, and I did actually work as a homeopath for a long time, then became a GP, and then spent 20 years as a forensic medical officer working with the police, so as far away from homeopathy as you can get. So somehow or another I've found my way back to a more alternative, holistic approach again. Yeah, public speaking. It's the number one fear. Yeah. It's above the fear of death. So that's like basically saying, rather than being on that stage, I'd rather be in that coffin there. Yeah. But, so just bear with me a bit, because I've not done this too often. This is the first time I've been asked to do this. Having said that, I'm now getting requests in other parts of the country, so I'm not quite sure how that's happened, but I'm happy to go with it. But I'm not just here as a doctor, I'm here as a patient too. So it's not just book knowledge, it's actual experience. So I'm talking, when I talk to you, I know a lot of this stuff through direct experience, and not just myself, but with some friends and relatives who've had very serious health conditions who I've passed some of this information on, and it's transformed their lives, which is what's made me such a passionate advocate of this subject. And the subject is the word cannabis, and cannabis is a very emotive word, and it's like if you say cannabis to Theresa May, she'd go, don't say that, go away. So you get that kind of reaction, and then I guess for a long time, as a forensic medical doctor, I was very anti-cannabis, because all the people I met in police stations were stoners basically, and they were at the far extreme, and I'd ask them, do you take any drugs? No. And then I'd have to ask, do you take cannabis? Because they didn't consider cannabis a drug, which I'm seeing their point of view now, but at the time I used to think, okay, then how much cannabis do you use? And it'd be like 5 buckets a day. 5 buckets? What? Totally out of their tree all the time. And I obviously would see the psychosis as well. And so then I was thinking about this, and it's a bit like, say, with alcohol, and you could have an alcoholic tincture that you get from a health food shop, or you could get say a pint of beer that's 3%, or you could get vodka 42%, and it's like saying they're all the same thing. So cannabis is equally nuanced, and the cannabis that's on our streets at the moment, skunk, isn't, in my view, it's not. It's an aberration, really. So this smoke screen that's occurred. It's been driven really by both sides. It's been driven by the scientific and political communities, but also by the kind of counterculture that has gone off and bred these ridiculous strains. So that they've altered the basic constituents in cannabis, and just so you can get out of your head, and that's what skunk is. So I'm trying to get back to the middle ground, really, and my interest isn't about recreational, it's really about cannabis as a medicine, and cannabis is an amazing medicine, whether it's the full-strength medicine, cannabis, which has got the psychoactive component in, which is THC, or the stuff that you actually go into Holland and Barrett now and you see it, CBD, and that's with the psychoactive bit removed, the THC removed, and really that's the kind of dumbed down version of cannabis is like the two main things are the THC and CBD. They're called cannabinoids, And more and more, rather than calling it cannabis, I think we should be referring to it as cannabinoid medicine, because those two things are quite important ingredients in this whole thing. But there's over 100 cannabinoids, and those two are the ones that have been researched the most. So when the GMC or the medical profession said, well, there's not enough research done yet, well, that's a bit disingenuous, because there's at least 20,000 studies been done on cannabis. So there's a hell of a lot of research, and I'm basing a lot of what I'm saying on this research. So that, yeah, there's not only THC and CBD, but there's countless others, and they've all got very distinct roles. And what we're finding now is that they actually work in a synergy, they work together, and this is called the entourage effect. So on its own, in isolated, there'll be a certain effect, but it's nowhere near as effective than when it's got all its mates with it, helping it. And the cannabinoids are only part of the picture, because also within the cannabis plant you've got other things called flavonoids and terpenes. Terpenes are the things that make you smell a plant and go, oh, that's nice. So like lavender, the terpene in lavender is lavanol, so that's the thing that, in lemon it's citronol, and so on. So anything that smells nice like that is usually a terpene, and it's not just a nice smell, but it's a potent healer in its own right. So a bit of research I saw recently with lavanol, for instance, is basically essential oil of lavender, and the researchers took 3, 4, 5 drops, gave it internally, not putting it in an aromatherapy diffuser, but gave it internally, and they found it was 10 times more effective when taken internally. It was quite safe, by the way, and if you don't like the taste, you can put it in a gelatin capsule and just swallow it. And they found that to be as effective as 5 milligrams of diazepam. Now I know which one I'd rather take. So that's terpenes for you. They are powerful healers in their own right, and this is all packaged together in this amazing plant, in this amazing cannabis plant. And really, if we look at what nature intended, the original cannabis plant, the ratio of the two main active ingredients, the psychoactive THC and the CBD, were 1:1. This is the intelligence of nature, because when you take skunk, all the CBD has been bred out of it. So you've got pure high levels of THC, and that can tip people into psychosis, especially if you're a teenager and you've got a developing nervous system. Then it's pretty risky business, and just a single joint could tip somebody into psychosis. So it can happen very quickly. And what you'll find with some of the research that I'm going to present tonight is just one dose of something can radically transform the nervous system, just like that. So, and it can happen the other way in a negative way as well. So we have to use these things with respect. They're potent agents. So nature basically has provided us with this perfect ratio of 1:1, but we've distorted that, or completely distorted it, so there's no CBD in it. And to give you an example of what I'm talking about, I don't know whether any of you ever come across the Charlotte's Web story, but Charlotte is a little girl in, I think she is in one of the states that actually legalised cannabis first, Colorado. But basically she'd got a thing called Dravet's syndrome, and Dravet's syndrome is a really severe form of epilepsy in which you're getting up to 100 fits a day, which is mind-boggling how, I mean, you basically spend your whole day fitting. And that was from a little baby, and as each year went by, she was failing to thrive basically, because it was damaging her brain and nervous system, having so many fits a day. The paediatricians who were giving her adult epileptic drugs, you know, things that most adults would be out of it. And even then, it wasn't stopping her fits. She was still fitting and fitting and fitting, despite all this pharmaceutical medication. Anyway, it just so happened that because in Colorado, medicinal cannabis was being legalized, that this particular farm was growing cannabis, and the guy said, I'm not sure why we did this, but we'd actually bred out most of the THC, and it was just high strength CBD. So they had to fight tooth and nail and get several doctors to agree this, but they got hold of some of this, which it's now called Charlotte's Web, the strain of cannabis, and it was in the form of a concentrated oil. And there's little Charlotte, I think she was probably 3 or 4 by this point, and after the first few drops went in, she stopped fitting. That's how quickly it worked. And she gets 1 or 2 fits a day at the most. So it can change people's lives immediately. You know, it's not just this will build up, and that's how potent this stuff can be. And a lot of doctors will go, well, what about the placebo effect? Well, if you're telling me that's placebo, then what is the placebo effect, you know? And if it is the placebo effect, then we'll just keep giving her that, because all that family want is for her to thrive and stop having fits. And while I'm on the psychosis bit, I'm looking at a study from the journal, the psychiatric journal, quite a prestigious one, and they were looking at psychosis and using CBD for psychosis, and they were doing brain scans, and they could see areas of the brain that were damaged by the psychosis, and after 1 dose of CBD they could see immediate changes and improvements that actually clinically, and it's like they're going, what, this is unbelievable. So that's how quickly it can affect people. So then you see what nature's done. It's given you THC, which has healing benefits as well. You'll see later that THC can switch off cancer cells. It's like putting a key in a lock and switching it off. So there is a role for THC, and you don't necessarily have to take so much that it has a psychoactive effect even. But what nature has done is it's put the antidote in there, 1-to-1. So when CBD is with the THC, you're not really going to get psychosis, you know, because the antidote's built into the plant. So it's beautiful how it's done this, and it's what worries me now is that already the pharmaceutical companies, the only way they can actually make any money out of this, because they can't patent a whole plant, is they've got to isolate stuff. And as soon as you start isolating things, we've just seen that's like breathing out the CBD, and you're losing the entourage effect. So when I look at the studies on CBD, for instance, in the early days they were giving CBD isolate, which means they've just, the rest of the plant's gone, they've just concentrated this. And the trouble with that is they've found, and they're actually acknowledging this, is, say for instance you look at anxiety, they found the sweet spot for anxiety for most people is 300 milligrams of CBD. And unless you hit that sweet spot, going up to it, no effect, hit the sweet spot, yeah, anxiety relieved, go beyond it, more anxiety. So, we're so individual that not everybody's sweet spot is going to be bang on 300 milligrams. So it's like, we're back to that sort of allopathic thing of, you know, trial and error. But what they've now acknowledged is if you give whole plant CBD, not necessarily with the THC, but with all the other ingredients, all the other cannabinoids, all the other terpenes, that 300 milligrams becomes 25 milligrams of CBD. And as you increase the dose, the effect just keeps getting better and better and better. And there's no sweet spot that you've got to hit. So they're now starting to admit that, yeah, maybe we need to look at the whole plant as opposed to the isolate. So, why do we go out of balance? Because part of this talk is why we go out of balance, and how can cannabis help get us into balance? If you just looked at that superficially, you think, what's all this about? Well, basically, within our system, our biological system, there's a homeostasis, basically. And homeostasis means that the body is constantly trying to bring all its systems into balance, whether it's the immune system, whether it's neurotransmitters, whether it's digestion, whatever. It's trying to maintain a balance. And I'll give you an example of that. Blood sugar. If blood sugar's running about 5, at a level of 5 international units, then we'll feel fine. If it drops down to 3, you're starting to feel a bit irritable. If it drops down to 0, you're passing out and going into a coma. If it starts to raise higher and higher and higher, by the time it gets up to 30, you're starting to go into a coma. At that end as well, you're very sick, and at both ends you could die. So homeostasis basically is all the body's mechanisms, secretes insulin, brings this level, brings the blood sugar back down to this. It keeps it amazingly in the correct zone for most people, unless they're ill, unless they've got diabetes. And then the homeostatic mechanism is broken, and that's when we need external help. But that's just one of many systems in which we're doing it with temperature regulation, we're doing it with all the minerals in our body, like sodium, calcium. If we've got too much calcium, we feel weak and tired. If we've got too little, we feel weak and tired, and we can die at either end of overdose from sodium. If you want to kill somebody, give them lots of sodium. If you want them to collapse, deprive them of sodium. So it's amazing, really, that the body is able to keep all these different systems in balance. And this is the incredible thing. I'll read you a quote I saw the other day by a cardiovascular surgeon. Now, I've worked with a lot of doctors, and the hardest nuts to crack in terms of anything alternative or outside of the mainstream are surgeons. And this is a quote by Dr. David Allen, a cardiovascular surgeon. The discovery of the endocannabinoid system is the single most important medical scientific discovery ever, and will save more lives than the discovery and application of sterile surgical technique. That means people getting post-operative. So for a surgeon to say that to me is mind-blowing. So what's he mean, the endocannabinoid system? Well, what he's referring to there is within virtually every cell of our body, we've got cannabis receptors, CB1, CB2, 2 different types, but throughout our whole system, everywhere. I saw a quote many years ago, somebody who was against Big Pharma, and they said, well, why should we take paracetamol? We haven't got paracetamol deficiency. But actually, we have often got cannabis deficiency or endocannabinoid deficiency, and a doctor has coined that term in about 2005, and he's called it endocannabinoid deficiency syndrome. So we can become deficient in cannabinoids within our own system. And we've known for a long time we've got opiates, the brain nervous system, they're called endorphins. So we've got our own drug administration painkillers within our own system, and a lot of the I'll keep digressing here, but a lot of the placebo effect, actually, that doesn't mean nothing's happening. That means we've actually requested somehow that our own body makes its own chemicals again. And research has proven that when you use radioactive isotopes, say for instance, there's some neurotransmitter that maybe needs iodine. If you put radioactive iodine into the system and somebody's taken placebo for a few weeks, you would expect that it wouldn't show up in the brain because your body's not, doing anything. The placebo's not working, nothing's happening. Well, actually, if your body's making its own chemicals, it will grab that radioactive iodine and incorporate it into the molecule, the neurotransmitter. And when they did the scan, the whole brain showed that there was radioactive isotopes all over the brain in the receptors. So placebo isn't nothing. Placebo is your body is doing its own thing. It's just, it needed kick-starting through your intention or your belief that you were taking something that was going to heal you. So we actually make our own endocannabinoids, and I think it was in the early 90s they discovered a molecule called anandamide. Ananda in Sanskrit means bliss, and it was actually called that because it's very, very similar to that THC so there's cannabis plant with its psychoactive THC. We're producing the same thing in our brains, like we're producing the similar kind of opiate and endorphin. So anandamide occurs in our own brains, and it makes us feel good, makes us feel blissful, happy, chirpy. And it's not surprising that when we become deficient in it, that life gets harder, we feel grimmer. So a big part of a deficiency syndrome of endocannabinoids is brain fog, fatigue, headaches, migraines, flitting aches and pains all over the place, just low sense of well-being, depression. And why is this? It's because I've talked about homeostasis and all these different systems that are trying to bring the body back into balance, and actually they don't work in isolation either. So neurotransmitters are communicating with hormones, and they're regulating minerals and how much sodium and calcium, and it's all totally interdependent. It's like an ecosystem our body is. And what's the role of the cannabis system within it? It actually, it's like the governor of all that. It helps all these things communicate with each other. So it's got a key central role. So if your cannabis levels go down, endocannabinoids go down, then all these other systems start to go out of balance. It makes it harder for your system to stay in balance. And I've sort of realised this probably about 20 years ago, and now it's becoming more and more prevalent. But chronic inflammation is really the thing that is fueling most of our chronic ailments, whether they be depression. Professor of psychiatry and neuroscience at Cambridge has just written a book called The Inflamed Mind, and that is all based around, you can get depressed because of events and traumas, psychological traumas, but a lot of depression is actually biochemical, and it's inflammation, and it's inflammatory particles crossing the blood-brain barrier and inducing what's called the sickness behaviour. And sickness behaviour is, if you've got a dog that's ever been ill, you'll know that what they do is they go and curl up in a basket and they don't want to eat and drink, and that's sickness behaviour. And it's supposed to be a short-term thing, and it shuts everything down just so the body can concentrate on healing. It puts all its energy into the immune system, killing off the invading organism, which is probably an infective agent. And so after a few days, the dog's up and running again. If you've had flu, you've all had sickness behaviour, you're shut down. You feel a bit depressed. The depression is to not make you want to jump up and do stuff. The fatigue is to keep you in bed and rest. You lose your appetite because you can't waste energy digesting food. It's all elegant. It's beautiful when it works short term. The problem is, what would happen if that was switched on all the time? Well, that's ME. and it's also a whole range of other chronic illnesses. And what's driving those illnesses is chronic inflammation. And it's not just an infective organism like a bacteria, virus and so on, but the immune system will do that from emotional stress. That's, you know, your boss getting on at you all the time, or sleep deprivation from working late or staying up late chronically, or even once or twice a week is enough to generate enough inflammation. It could be chemicals in the environment, pesticides, toxins, and this is the thing. You know, the scientists will say that level of pesticide is okay, that level is, and they look at all these specific individually and say that's fine, that level's fine, that level. But then when you put them all together as a cocktail, then they all start to work together to bring you into a state of chronic inflammation. Plus the fact all those things, the way the body deals with them is it gets overloaded and I'll just put that in a fat cell and deal with it another day. So yeah, that was fine if you just ate it once or twice, but if you're eating it regularly and you're getting that pesticide in yourself, the levels build up and up. And then you go to the dentist and they stick mercury in your teeth or some other chemical, or they put fluoride in the water and chlorine in the shower, and it's coming at us from all, we've only been doing this for about 150 years, and we've had a very long time for the human body to evolve, but the rapidity with which new stuff is being invented, plastics, xenoestrogens, that's what they're called. A xenoestrogen is a plastic that imitates estrogen, and if you look at the water supply now, it'll be full of plastics, xenoestrogens, cocaine, hormone contraception from women peeing it in there. This doesn't get filtered out. I once got a distilled water maker, and I put tap water in there, and you would not believe the sludge that is left in that thing. When you look at some water, it looks nice and clear, but if you distill off most of that water and purify it, what's left is sludge, and it's horrific, the amount of sludge in there, and most of it isn't good for you. So we're drinking this in on a regular basis in very small quantities. It's building up in our system. We're getting overloaded and overwhelmed by it. Then we've got all the EMFs. That has an effect as well. Allergens and so on. So I don't need to go into everything, but we're being overwhelmed by this constant insult to our body, which we've never really in the history of man so far, or mankind I should say, had to deal with. And this means that the immune system is always on, and it's putting us into sickness behaviour. What happens with the immune system when, say, there's an acute infection? It's like a load of guys coming out with rifles, bazookas and that, and they're shooting. And when they're shooting, they kill the bacteria, the virus, but they're also hitting your healthy cell walls and stuff, and debris and damage. There's collateral damage from your immune system. That's called inflammatory cytokines, which the immune system produces in a response to an infection. So if you imagine that that's switched on all the time, we're constantly getting collateral damage from our immune system. That's what rheumatoid arthritis is, lupus, you name it. Most illnesses, including cancer, are being fueled by inflammation. They love it. They love it. Cancer cells love inflammation. So how does cannabis feature in all this? Well, actually, I saw an article in New Scientist not so long ago, and they were saying, well, what is it actually that in a normal system switches off this acute immune response? And they found part of the immune system, there's a thing called resolvin, and the body produces resolvin in order to say, okay guys, put your guns down now, you can rest, and switches off this immune thing. And then the scientists said, well, what's actually how can we stimulate resolvin to be produced in the body so that we can dampen down this fire in the body. And they found 3 things. They found low-dose aspirin does it. They found stretching, like yoga, does it. And they found cannabis does it. And why would cannabis do it? Well, that's its job. It's the endocannabinoid system is orchestrating all this. It's pulling all the strings and saying, okay guys, calm down, let's get back into balance, let's get back into balance. That's what it's there for. That's why we've got it in our system. And it's got multiple different functions. So like it's involved with pain relief, it's going to stop you feeling sick, it's going to protect your nerves, it's going to regenerate nerves. So I'll just stop there and talk about the Israeli army. Why does Israel feature? Well, the guy that actually discovered the components of cannabis THC is Professor Meshalom, and he's an Israeli scientist, and he did that in the 60s, and he's done a whole load of research since. He's a brilliant guy, but part of his research was that he discovered that CBD in particular is brilliant at reversing brain damage, especially in the acute stages. And we'd love a drug that, as soon as you get a brain injury, because what happens with a brain injury, you rupture a whole load of neurons, and the neurotransmitter that helps us consolidate memories, called glutamate, that's great. It's a bit like kerosene. When it's in a can, it's fine, but if it leaks out and there's a bit of fire, it's toxic, and so is glutamate. And if that leaks into the brain, it starts destroying the brain, further damage. So how do you limit that? How do you sort of firefight the damage from glutamate? And they've been looking for a pharmaceutical drug for this for years, but they haven't found one. The only thing that does it is CBD. And so every member of the Israeli army goes around with a little pack of CBD, and as soon as they get a head injury, or even if one of the enemy gets a head injury, they give them some CBD as first aid, and it will reduce the trauma by at least 20%. So which in terms of your chances of functioning and getting long-term damage is quite a big percentage. With me, sir. So yeah, we used to think that brain cells just died off, but neuroplasticity is a buzzword in the neuroscience community, and basically that means that we're able to make new brain cells and regenerate our brain. The liver's good at regenerating itself, so if you had a big tumour in your liver, they could cut 2/3 of it away and then the liver will grow again. The brain can actually do that, and it can do it even better if it's got CBD in there, stimulating it, and the CBD will protect the nerves that are already there. It will protect the sheaths of the nerves, that's called myelin. So when you've got MS, the myelin sheath is being destroyed. So it won't necessarily cure MS, but it will certainly slow it down and help reverse some of the changes. And a lot of these neurological diseases like Parkinson's, where you've got the tremor and so on, they can be slowed down, and symptomatically we're finding cannabis can actually quite considerably improve the quality of life and well-being for people by this neuroprotective thing of slowing the disease down but also treating the symptoms. So some powerful YouTube videos of people literally shaking like this, saying, I'm just going to go and 20 minutes, light up a joint and come back, and they're like this again. Look at that. There aren't many pharmaceutical drugs that will do that consistently. They'll work for a while, but then they'll tail off. So for actual sufferers, this plant is a godsend. And it's just such a shame that we're lagging way behind a lot of countries in the world in catching up with what science and also what patients are telling scientists and doctors is helping them, really. What about safety? What about safety of cannabis? Cannabinoids, CBD? Because I don't know whether you remember Professor Nutt, but under Gordon Brown's government, Professor Nutt was the drug czar appointed to advise the government on all manner of drugs. He's a brilliant guy, and he told the government the truth and got the sack. They didn't like what he had to say. And he was basing it all on scientific evidence. They don't want to hear evidence, and yet that's what his job is. You know, he now is working at Imperial College London and in the Department of Psychedelic Medicine, and he's a highly respected leading researcher in the field of all kind of medical applications of not only cannabis but psilocybin, the mushroom, LSD. All these things, when used in the right way, are therapeutic, it turns out. Right, I've just got a quote from him that I'd just like to yeah, I mean, this is a letter he once wrote. He said, "Why?" I mean, this was asking why the British is lagging so far behind the rest of the world, and he's saying 200 million US citizens now have access to medicinal marijuana, and 100 million can legally buy it recreationally, and 17 other countries like Holland, Belgium, Germany have made cannabis a medicine. We finally made it a medicine, but there is not a single doctor in this country that has got the balls, literally, to prescribe it. They're scared of the GMC coming down on, like it's on a hot brick. So Sajid Javid, bless him, got his act together and made it happen just like that. Everybody breathes a sigh of relief, and then nobody's getting a prescription. So we're still, and Professor Nutt's going, well, why is that? And then the GMC, well, there's not enough research. And 20,000 studies, that's not good enough, you know. So if we wanted to do our own research in this country, professors are saying it takes about a year to apply for a license, and then it costs about 5,000 quid to get the license, and it slows the whole thing down, and it's deliberate almost, you know. It's like he's basically saying, and once Theresa May goes, maybe things will change, because she's been very anti it, just doesn't like the word cannabis. Which is a bit strange, because her husband has got huge shares in British Sugar, who have diversified into the cannabis market, and they're growing tons of cannabis, literally around Peterborough. And it turns out that the UK is the biggest exporter of medicinal cannabis to the world. We produce 90 tons a year, but we're not allowed to use it or prescribe it. So I'm sure Dylan will get another guy to come and stand here on another day and talk about all the politics, because it is mad. And serendipitously, when I started to get into this, when I was walking my dog on the park in Leicester, I met a Dr Bone, and she's a doctor of law at Leicester University, and her whole reason for being is researching and putting papers out and writing books about the humanitarian aspects of denying cannabis medicine to people. So you know, it's coming. It's taking us a bit longer. So safety, is it safe? Well, I would say when we use it as nature has provided in the 1-to-1 ratio or something quite similar, it's a very safe thing, and if we don't abuse it, if we use it with respect, it's great. And as I said, as a doctor, I wouldn't recommend teenagers to use it unless they had Dravet syndrome or some medical condition that really was crying out. In a sense, Dravet syndrome is basically saying I've got an endocannabinoid deficiency as well here. But for most teenagers, they've got a healthy endocannabinoid system, so they don't need extra putting in. But as you get older, then you do. Then you'll become relatively deficient, and over time it makes more and more sense to actually use something like CBD, whole plant CBD, as a preventative medicine, and because basically, if you wait until you've got a tremor with Parkinson's, it's a bit late. And Parkinson's starts 30 years before you develop a tremor. And how does that manifest? Well, it might be a loss of taste, smell. People actually start to act out their dreams. They're all signs that you're going to develop Parkinson's, but it takes another 30 years to manifest as all the classic things. So with all this going on in our, all this assault on our immune system, to me it seems a sensible strategy. Just take a bit every day, just protect your brain to help keep things going even before you've got symptoms. But I suspect, if I give you my own personal experiences with it, how I got into it was, first of all, I'm curious about stuff, and a friend had sent me some information, and so I ordered some CBD, and I didn't know the strength or anything, from Amazon. I think it was in 2014 or something, and I took a few drops and I put it on a shelf and forgot about it. And then I went to the dentist, and I got a really deep filling that needed doing, and he filled it for me, and he said it might be a bit uncomfortable for a few days. I was in agony for 3 weeks. I was pulling my hair out, I couldn't sleep, it was just constant agony. So I went through all the classic remedies, clove oil, all these things, paracetamol, aspirin, ibuprofen, cocodamol, dihydrocodeine even, which is a pretty strong opiate, and it still didn't really do much. Gave me, it took a bit of the edge off it, but it didn't stop this throbbing pain. And then I saw this stuff on the shelf, and oh, God's sake, and I just took a whole pipette of it and squeezed it into my mouth. 5 minutes later, the pain was gone, and it never came back. And as a doctor, I'm going, what? This is, no, this doesn't compute. What? No. So then I started to think, because I was getting really bad migraines on a very regular basis, and I don't consider migraine a headache. I think it's a neurological disorder. Because the headache's just a small part of it. There's so many other things, like with the nausea and disturbed vision. Some people can have a kind of stroke-like effect from it. It can make some people's lives absolute misery, and it can last days and days, and one migraine can run into another. And I started to think, Charlotte's Web, epilepsy. Now, we don't know what causes epilepsy really in most cases, and we don't know what causes migraine amazingly. I don't know whether you as members of the public think that doctors have got most things sus, but when you're actually in that world, and then when you become a patient, you go, oh my God, they don't know much about any of these things. Like there's this word idiopathic. Idiopathic means we don't have a clue. So hypertension, high blood pressure, most of those cases idiopathic, we don't know what causes it, and there's a whole raft of illnesses that we don't know really what's causing them. But I had this theory, because I thought, well, in epilepsy, to start with, you get what's called a prodrome, and a prodrome is where you start to feel a bit out of sorts, not quite yourself, maybe a bit tired, and then you get what's called an aura, and that's when you might have strange smells. That's a weird phenomena occurring, and then you get the attack, you're having a fit, and then you get postdrome, which means you feel washed out for days afterwards. And for migraine, it's exactly the same. You get the prodrome, you start to feel a bit like this. You get the aura, which is the flashing lights, then you get the attack, the headache, nausea, and then after that you're washed out. So I was thinking, well, if it works for epilepsy, I might as well start taking this on a regular basis and see if it affects my migraines. After 2 years, I had hardly had a migraine, and when I did, I took full strength cannabis and it knocked it out in 5 minutes. Because the thing is with a migraine is if you wait and think, is this an ordinary headache, tension, or is it the migraine? What happens is your trigeminal nerve that supplies the face here, after a while, secretes something called substance P, which is an inflammatory peptide, and once that's out, all hell breaks loose, and it's very hard to put the horses are bolted out of the gate or whatever that analogy is. You can't get them back in anyway. So you want to hit a migraine as soon as you can. And I found I will sometimes vape full strength cannabis, as close to 1-to-1, but I won't need very much, 1 or 2 puffs. I won't need to get out of my head or anything like that, and it will be over, and I can get on with my day. And so the CBD, taken as a preventative, has reduced the attacks down from 1 a week to 1 or 2 a year at most. And then I do get a couple of puffs of actual cannabis, and it's gone. And for me, nausea is way worse than pain. I'd much rather have pain than nausea. I hate the nausea you get with the migraine and the vomiting. So if you said to the pharmaceutical industry, I've got a medicine here that is anti-nausea, it kills pain, it helps you go to sleep, it kills anxiety, and it helps depression, and its side effect is anti-inflammatory, they'd be going, yeah, give me that, what is it? Cannabis. That's what cannabis does for us. And you can see why I'm passionate about it now. And it's largely, again, personal experience. I had to stop work because I was severely depressed, burnt out. And I was a good boy. I went and saw a psychiatrist, and he gave me venlafaxine, a powerful antidepressant, which then gave me a second illness to deal with at the same time as the depression. And he said, oh yeah, just persist with it, keep going and keep increasing the dose. Now, when I say second illness, even with the depression, it wasn't affecting my sleep. Once I was on the venlafaxine, I couldn't go to sleep. I'd feel really tired, fall asleep for half an hour, and then be wide awake, and be wide awake most of the night. And then if I did manage to fall asleep, I'd go, like this, and that would jerk me awake. Really, not just restless legs, but actual physical jerks. I developed a vocal tic, which was like this, I'd be walking, I thought, this is ridiculous. I didn't have any of this stuff. Now I've got another illness alongside this. And then he said, well, you obviously need to increase the dose further. And okay, I did that, and then I was getting massive amounts of anxiety, and I realised, what's this? The other thing that venlafaxine is licensed for is panic disorder, and yet it was causing me to get panic and anxiety. And I was thinking, well, this is completely bizarre. It took me 6 months to get off it because it's very addictive in terms of the body zaps you. If you miss a dose, you'd know about it. You feel like you've got flu, and then it's like somebody's come up with a zapper and gone through your nervous system like this. So it took me 6 months to get off this by slowly decreasing the dose. And that's when I got myself onto cannabis. And it took a while, but I've come out of that. But if I told the psychiatrist, he just wouldn't believe me, wouldn't want to know. Safety. What do you think to paracetamol? That's available over the counter, isn't it? That kills people. And it doesn't kill people just because they're suicidal and they take an overdose, but actually, if you don't know about paracetamol and its dangers, say for instance you got it from Tesco rather than the pharmacist, you go to the pharmacist and they may warn you not to exceed the dose, but they won't explain why. They won't necessarily explain that it could kill you, And I was just reading a little while ago, a 17-year-old girl got a really bad headache. She was a hairdresser, and she said, "Oh, I can't stand this." And she was, rather than taking 8 a day, she took 10 a day, and then left it off, and then she was not really overdosing, but it was more than she should have taken. Within a week, she died of liver failure, and that is not uncommon. So there's this thing that is licensed to be sold over the counter, and everybody would go, "Well, yeah, that's all right. I can take paracetamol." What? No. And the latest research on paracetamol is that it causes emotional flattening. It's called affective blunting. So it actually you can't feel your emotions if you're on it regularly. If you've got a chronic condition, pain, it will cause this blunting. So that's that. Now with aspirin, it used to be 75 milligrams as a tiny dose, and they say, well, we'll take that because it could prevent cancers and it could prevent heart attacks and stuff, and you don't even go there anymore. Doctors are saying don't take, it's too risky because you could get a gastrointestinal bleed, and I've been to scenes where people have vomited a ton of blood all at once and died. So these things over the counter kill people on a regular basis, to say nothing of ibuprofen, which will do the same. They're supposed to be very short-term medications, and then, once you start using on a regular basis. So compared with these things, cannabis, CBD in particular, it's like, what's the big deal about it? It's as dangerous as, say, olive oil is. Unless you get the mafia stuff that we're living. Yeah, but that's another story and another lecture. I was trying to think of a pharmaceutical drug that is safe, and I can't think of one. Say, for instance, you've got insomnia, and you go to the doctor and say, "Well, I've had this for over a week now, and it's driving me nuts." And they give you something like Zolpidem, one of these Z name drugs. That puts your risk of death up by 3 to 4% immediately. Just a few doses of that has a consequence to it potentially. It's not. They've noticed this. It's not necessarily a causative thing. They've noticed this association, but I've probably got the statistics in here somewhere. But these things are deadly, and they're killing people, and they take them in industrial quantities, give them out in America in particular. And of course, America's got the OxyContin opiate crisis, and these are all stuff that the doctors are quite happy to give out. And then as soon as you mention cannabis, it's a drug, it's dangerous. Well, it's no near as dangerous as most of the stuff that you're saying is all right over the counter and that you actually prescribe and then indiscriminately keep on prescribing on a chronic basis. So if you have ibuprofen for more than 6 months, your risk of heart attack goes up by 30%. That's not a risk I want to take, really. It's Russian roulette. With diazepam, if you're on that for more than six months, your risk of Alzheimer's in the future goes up by 50%. So there are major consequences to all these pharmaceutical drugs, and I would advocate, why do they get given out so readily? And it's because time pressure. You've got 7 or 8 minutes with the patient. You've got to seem to be doing something. You haven't got time to explain all the things you could do before bringing in the heavy artillery, all the other measures, the countless measures of psychosocial things, and like Lavinol or any of these things before you get to this. This should be kept for, emergencies only, and only when everything else isn't working as a last resort. But it's there straight away, offered. There you go, you've got your prescription, off you go. Anyway, I could talk endlessly about all this stuff. So I was only going to talk for 20 minutes. So sorry about that, I think I've nearly doubled it. But what I thought I'd do is just, if you've got any questions, and I'll see if I've got the capabilities to answer them. If you've got any burning questions from anything I've said or clarification. Yeah.
I'd like to ask about taking it, as you said, as a preventative, so you haven't got anything wrong with you. And would that be preventative, like to take it iron forever? And how does that correspond with this idea of the body itself trying to keep itself within balance? So, for example, would the body think, all right, I'm getting this kind of like from the external, I don't need to produce my own now and produce its own? How much it dispenses itself?
Yeah, no, that's a brilliant question, and it's something I've thought about, and so there are ways of, without any external stuff, of regenerating our endocannabinoid system, and they're all things like being on a good diet, getting plenty of rest, meditation, relaxation, yoga. As I said, that we will actually help to regenerate our endocannabinoid system. Exercise is absolutely brilliant, but it's got to be something you enjoy, because this is the interesting thing, is if you hate running and you think, I've got to run, the body then interprets that as a stress and produces stress hormones. But if you love dancing and you do that, then you'll get the benefits of that, and it will actually help. So what happens is when the body produces the anandamide, the feel-good chemical in our brains, the effect doesn't last that long. I mean, they used to think the runner's high was endorphins, opiate, but they now realise it's anandamide. So the runners just feel magnificent, you feel expanded and happy and euphoric. But that wears off pretty quickly. And the reason for that is the brain produces an enzyme which breaks the anandamide down fairly quickly. And what we find is that CBD actually blocks that enzyme, so our own anandamide lasts longer. And then by putting cannabinoids into the system, it's actually encouraging the body to regenerate its own endocannabinoid system. So you're actually giving it the material that it can use to make its own stuff, and it preserves what it's already got there. So I would say, we shouldn't really. I mean, the kind of bad medical model really is I've been letting my body fall apart. I've been eating the wrong stuff. I've been staying up late. I've been doing a lot of bad habits, and now I've got some ailment, and I just want a drug from the doctor to make those symptoms go away. And what that is doing then is it's shutting down the body's. Really, those symptoms are saying, I need attention, I need you to do something about this, and I need you to do more exercise, or eat a better diet, and we've got to really take a lot more responsibility rather than just suppressing symptoms with strong, powerful pharmaceutical medications. And so, let's not do that with cannabis either. Let's also cooperate with it. So it's like the CBD might be like finger in the dike, so we're stopping a lot of the water leaking out, but then let's start getting our act together as we start to feel better and stronger from the effects of the CBD as our well-being increases. So like for instance, when you're severely depressed, the last thing you feel like doing and can do is exercise. You just can't do it. But once you get to a certain point in your recovery, you can do it. You can do the exercise, and then it will snowball and build from there. So that the CBD is a stopgap to start with, finger in the dike. But then we've got a responsibility to then start thinking, how can I help regenerate my endocannabinoid system? How can I work in cooperation with this? And don't ignore your intuition, because I've used various things in the past. And then suddenly thought, I've got this intuitive thing, I don't need to use that anymore, stop doing it. And I'll give you an example of that, and it's again a maverick thing which would shock most doctors. So when I was deeply depressed, I had what was called psychomotor retardation, which basically means I couldn't move, I couldn't initiate action. So I remember once sitting in the car, and I was going to meet somebody, and I was in the car for 3 hours because I couldn't get out. I just couldn't move. And then I realised I was really thirsty, and there was a bottle of water on the back seat, and I didn't have the motivation to even get that. So that's how bad it was. So I was on all the psychiatric drugs. While I was feeling this, so they didn't help me. So what was the solution to that? This came to me intuitively. I got some organic tobacco and I started smoking a pipe. And within 5 minutes of smoking a pipe, I could act again, and I was functional. And why was that? Well, there's the nicotine there, and there's things called monoamine oxidase inhibitors. They're kind of natural antidepressants. So again, tobacco is another thing, but it's been distorted and made into an awful thing in cigarettes and by the tobacco industry. But actually, when you go back to its roots, it's a medicine. And when it's used with responsibility, it's got healing properties, and that's how I was using it. And then after about a year and a half of using this, I suddenly thought, I don't need this anymore. And I didn't have any nicotine withdrawal or anything. I just stopped and never, that was it. Didn't need it anymore. So it got me somewhere, and then intuitively it told me to use it, and then intuitively I didn't need it anymore. So if you work like that, you can finesse your way through this.
What was the tobacco?
Sorry?
What was the tobacco that you bought? Organic.
I sourced it from America somewhere. It's a few years back now, but I had to buy it as a leaf because you're allowed to import that. But if it's chopped up into and put in a tin, you can't import it. But I think it was Virginia or something like that. But yeah.
You can import tobacco in this country legally as well. Can I ask a question?
Yes, of course. Yeah.
You know, when you mentioned Parkinson's disease,
Yeah.
and then how the onset things happen 30 years before it can kick in. It's
Yeah.
like restless leg syndrome.
I don't think it is, as far as I know. This is more like acting out your dreams. So if you've got a partner lying in bed with you, it's like you're actually moving around and exaggerated. So we produce a substance in the brain at night which actually is a mild anaesthetic, which, so although we might be dreaming we're having a fight with somebody, we're not actually physically doing it. Once you start acting that out, then that would be, it would ring an alarm bell if I was your GP. I'd be thinking, okay, I'd better take note of this. Or if you came to me and, but with restless legs, because I've had that and I don't have it anymore. I think that's the CBD has definitely helped that. Sorry, yeah.
You mentioned lupus, and I've suffered with lupus. I just wondered if you thought CBD would be beneficial for lupus.
Yeah, because I think whatever's driving it, there'd be an element of chronic inflammation involved, or dysfunction in the immune system, and so yeah, I would say definitely. And when it comes to dosage, I would definitely start with a fairly mild concentration and start low and basically just increase it to the point where you feel you're getting some symptomatic relief, and then you'll know where you are. But we're so unique. It's like I saw this study done recently on identical twins, and this was to look at diet and effect on weight gain. And you think, well, identical twins, then they're eating the same stuff, so they'll have the same body weight, and apparently not. No, one twin can be overweight and another one, and they're identical. So what's going on? The researchers postulated that this was going to be genetic, and what they found shocked them. It wasn't anything to do with genetics. It was all down to circadian rhythms. And what's the circadian rhythm? Well, that's our daily clock. And as you go through the 24-hour day, there'll be certain key points that say, like at 2 o'clock in the morning, your body secretes testosterone, and then at 4 o'clock some cortisol, and so it's squirting out all these different chemicals at different times, clockwork every single day, and they found that people's circadian rhythms vary, and with these identical twins, one of them, say, may lose weight if they only eat carbohydrates at breakfast. The other one would need to eat proteins. Another one might need to avoid breakfast altogether. So they said, well, what's the overall advice we can give? Well, ignore government guidelines because they're trying to fit everybody into the same box. You've got to experiment and work it out for yourself, because there's no one size fits all. It's very individualistic, and it's the same we find with I find with the cannabinoids. Is like one drop, and somebody will go, I can't feel anything, and another person will go, oh yes, they can feel a relaxation, they can feel an increased sense of well-being. My anxiety's just melted away. And those dosages will vary. We're all very individualistic, and that changes from day to day as well. It's at this point, I should just mention about microdosing as well, because, you know, for most of us, including myself, you think, well, the more of something, then that's going to be better, isn't it? If you have a little bit and you have a good response, then even more is going to be even better. Seems logical. Well, I've proven this to myself through using this stuff, that actually the lower the dose, the better I feel, especially with depression. Depression works better with low doses of cannabis, and higher doses makes the depression worse. So that's why I say you have to finesse your way through this. It's not as clear cut. A headmaster that used to live next door to me when I used to babysit his children, he got back in touch with me a few years ago, and we used to go fishing together. And then I got a text from him one day, and he said, Mike, I was in the GP's with my wife, and it said, have a blood test for your prostate. So he said I had one. I had no symptoms whatsoever. The guy's 75, and he said my prostate got cancer and it's gone into the bones. I had no idea. Because he'd got diabetes and heart problems, he said they can't operate and they can't give me this, that, and the other. And he said my daughter is dying with breast cancer, and she's had 7 rounds of chemotherapy, and she said, Dad, don't do it. Whatever, it wasn't worth it. So he said, now what do I do, Mike? So I said, well, if you don't want to go down that route and you genuinely can't look at any of the other options, then try cannabis oil. And I'm talking about full strength cannabis here with the THC. And there are protocols for this that have been worked out. And the first guy that did it, Rick Simpson, he cured a melanoma, a Canadian guy. And his protocol was very extreme, because he was saying you need to build up tolerance and take 1 gram a day. 1 gram is a massive dose of cannabis, so it's mind-boggling. And that's also a bit depressing, because you think, well, I could never tolerate that amount of cannabis. Fortunately, it seems like he was over-egging it, and even with cancer, microdosing can switch the cancer off. So I said to my friend Mick, I said, well, see if you can get up to about a rice grain's worth of the oil. To give you an example of how potent that is, I remember reading an anecdotal thing of a woman who'd grown her own cannabis plants and used cannabis in large quantities through her whole life, and she was sceptical about the oil, and she said, no, that oil, I can. So she made her own oil, and she took a whole rice grain straight away without. You're supposed to go in very little, tiny bits and build up. She took a whole rice grain. She said, I spent the next 6 hours praying to God for this to stop, because the overdose from cannabis oil is horrendous. It won't kill you. It'll make you feel like you're dying. The room will be spinning. I'm talking from experience here. I accidentally did it in the beginning, and that was a useful experience, because now I know to advise patients to go very, very carefully. You would not want that experience, but it can floor people. You really have got to use it with great respect. But anyway, so I said to Mick, use about a rice, see if you can get up to a rice grain. Anyway, a few months later, how are you getting on? He said, oh, I'm on about 1/8 of a rice grain, I can't get past that. Well, it turns out that a small percentage of people can't build up a tolerance to cannabis, so they can't keep increasing the dose. So I thought, oh dear, poor old Mick. Then a month later, he went to his oncologist, had the blood test, and get the text back, cancer's gone. What? How has that happened? What? Yeah, I mean, I've been watching some talks with this guy who's a cannabis doctor in Maine in America, and there's only a couple of them there's only about 1 million people in Maine anyway, but there's only a couple of doctors, and so he gets, over the last 10 years, he's had thousands of patients come to him, and he said he still goes home every night going, what, this is impossible, I don't believe it, I can't, even after all that time, and seeing, for instance, somebody with MS, they've got a spastic bladder, which means they can't pee, basically, because the nerves aren't working. This person will get a joint, have one puff, and their bladder will function for the next week. No more cannabis, that's it, one puff. And he's going, what? This is incredible. But that's not placebo. If you're telling me that's placebo, then, it's beyond that. So the other aspect, unfortunately for Mick, was his daughter did die, but she was on huge doses of opiates for the pain relief and anti-nausea, and she couldn't sleep and had huge amounts of anxiety. So she's on all these different medications. She's got tons of children and grandchildren, and she wanted to remain as conscious as possible for as long as possible. So we got her the oil. And so how's Sarah getting on with the oil? Oh, she stopped all the medications. All she's taking is a little bit of the cannabis, and it's sorting out all her symptoms. And the Macmillan nurses have been taught now how to work with patients that want to use cannabis for end of life. Sorry, you've been dying to ask the questions.
There seems to be a recurrent theme in what you're talking about between inflammation and neurological related issues, and I'm very fascinated in this because my own work is in the area of olfaction and smell.
Yes.
And I'm very interested in how the olfactory system is affected by the kind of diets that we eat. So, for example, a lot of fast foods tend to cause inflammation and oxidative stress in the body because we're not getting those flavonoids and the terpenes that would come in sort of a normal, good, flavoursome food environment. So I'm wondering, and I'm not sure about this, but you mentioned terpenes at the very beginning, and I'm really interested in both the terpenes and the inflammation and how you think that might work. Like, what is it about these cannabinoids and terpenes in particular that you think is so powerful?
The honest answer is I don't know, but yet that this is just observed, and actual mechanisms are, there's still a ton of research to be done, and probably people like you are going to do it.
Well, maybe, but you mentioned terpenes. Is there? You mentioned it at the beginning as being really important. Is there some reason why you said that? Yeah,
it is, because lavenol is one of them, so we know that's got this powerful anti-anxiety effect, and it's a good sedative as well.
Yeah.
And then, like you hear about the Japanese are really into forest bathing, and now we're being encouraged. Well, a lot of that is, I'm sure we're inhaling terpenes like the pinene, and that some of these are quite stimulating and energizing. So this is what the whole of aromatherapy is based on.
Yeah.
And if you think about it, the extreme version of the opposite of aromatherapy is when you're at risk of anaphylactic shock, and you might be allergic to shrimp. Now, people have literally died because they've been in a restaurant and a waiter has walked by with a bowl of shrimp, whatever, steaming, and the smell of that has been enough to kill them.
Yeah.
So what happens there is that it gets breathed in, passes the blood-brain barrier, you know, huge, massive anaphylactic shock, and you drop dead. So the opposite of that, we breathe this stuff in and we get the healing benefits of it very quickly, you know. When I was at medical school, the blood-brain barrier was supposedly impermeable to virtually everything. Now they've had to say, oh, actually, it lets quite a lot of stuff through. We didn't know there was a lymphatic system in the brain called the glymphatic system. So we're finding stuff out all the time, and it's an ongoing, you know, and I think it's going to be a very exciting time for cannabis research, I really do. And I was just going to say one more, I will come to. So the antioxidant, the anti-inflammatory, antioxidant effect of cannabis, some researchers thought, well, how can we test this out? How can we see how good it is? Oh, I know, we'll look at alcoholics' livers. So people that drink alcohol heavily will get a range of disorders of their liver. The first thing that happens is you get a fatty liver, and then you get an inflamed liver, and then it goes on to cirrhosis, and then you can get liver cancer, various stages, and that's largely from inflammation from the alcohol. So they looked at thousands of people, alcoholics that had never smoked cannabis and alcoholics that occasionally smoked once a week or smoked every day. And would you believe it, the ones that even were smoking only once a week had really low incidences of any problems with their liver. So if you were an alcoholic, you better smoke some cannabis. They were blown away. The antioxidant effect is potent, and just one joint a week was enough to keep these people.
Probably good if you're eating a fast food diet then.
Probably is, yeah.
There's been a lot of media attention around cannabis oil and its effect on various illnesses. But I wonder whether the oil is better at delivering the beneficial effect, whether it's better than other forms of delivery, whether it's smoking the joint, whether it's putting cannabis in butter. It's just the media seems very focused on the oil.
Yeah, no, yeah, it's a brilliant question. I mean, the oil is highly concentrated, and so that's why the oil has received a lot of attention. So that all the different forms that it can come in. So you can get anything from the oil, which is basically a concentrated extract of basically the cannabis flower, and that's very potent. But then you can get tinctures, and tinctures are where you make that with alcohol tinctures, like most of the herbal medicine is based on tinctures. And what they've also done with the oil and the tinctures is in the process is they've done what they've decarboxylated process, which basically means the THC and the CBD in the raw form, they're acids. So it's THCA and CBDA. And THCA, the psychoactive thing, when it's in acid form, it doesn't have any psychoactive effect whatsoever. It has quite a different effect on the body. You could take a whole glass full of THC and drink it down and not be affected psychologically. But as soon as you heat that up above a certain temperature, it knocks the acid bit off and decarboxylates it, and then, wow, you know about that, even a small amount, and you could be in, if you took too much, you could be having this really overdose effect. So that's the oil and the tinctures, and then at the moment, my mum is using cannabis ointment. So why? She's got a really bad knee, really chronic pain. It's got the decarboxylated THC, and so the psychoactive one, but when you rub it in through the skin, it gets absorbed in through the skin and affects the inflammation locally. It's a good painkiller, but it doesn't get absorbed and you don't get the psychoactive effects. Because really, for somebody that's 86, I'd be very cautious about giving them anything that was psychoactive, because they could, although it's safe, you could fall over, you know, and you know, you don't want to do, you know, it's got to be used, you know, carefully. So that's ointments. Then there's smoking and vaping. The reason people smoke is just easy and convenient. But if you think about it, it's not very cost effective because you're burning and destroying most of it, and you have to smoke it fairly quickly because then suddenly it's all gone. So vaping makes a lot more sense, and these days you can buy quite elegant and sophisticated vape machines for say about 150, 200 quid, where you put the cannabis flower in. That's illegal, shouldn't be saying this. But, but the thing with that is you're then inhaling water vapour, so you're not damaging your lungs through that, but also you're preserving all the terpenes in that. So when you inhale cannabis vape, you can actually smell the lavanol or the pine or the lemony things. So that means you're getting those into your system as well. You don't stink of cannabis either afterwards, so you can be quite discreet, you know. And then someone's going, in a room even, it's gone within minutes, doesn't stick to your clothes. So there's a whole load of benefits, social and actually, then you can titrate the dose very carefully. And so what if you were going to do that, if you've got a chronic condition that did merit medicinal cannabis like that, what I would advise would be you take 1 or 2 puffs, switch it off, leave it for 5 or 10 minutes, and then do an inventory through your body. You know, how am I feeling in my mood? What about those aches and pains? Oh, yeah, I've still got that pain there. Take another couple of puffs. Oh yeah, that's gone there now. How am I feeling? Because a lot of people make this mistake that have used cannabis in their youth. They think, unless I'm feeling the psychoactive things, unless I'm feeling a bit, ooh, you know, like this, it's not working. Well, it works on all the other symptoms way before you get to that psychoactive thing, which is, so you can use it in a very finesse, careful way. So for some people, if they've got a dire need for it, if they've got the cancer like my friend Mick, then I would go for the oil. If it's something like anxiety, probably I would recommend CBD, and you can vape the CBD as well, and that's very effective in its own right. And again, you don't need much of that either, and take the inventory and don't overdo it, just build up gradually. I think they're most of the delivery methods. Suppositories as well. People can actually see YouTube videos where they show you how to make suppositories by putting it into ice cubes and then popping that up the back passage, and you've got a good blood supply there, and it gets absorbed into your system that way.
Well, you could put it in the other way, you know, as a cake.
You could do it that way. Yeah. Now the thing about edibles is, the thing about edibles is the mistake people. What happens then when you eat it is it has to be processed through your liver, and that process actually turns it into a slightly different type of THC, which is a much more potent and long-lasting effect. So if you smoked a joint, it may well have worn off after 1.5 to 2 hours, and the effects are pretty much immediate. So, but when you take an edible, it takes about 90 minutes to 2 hours to metabolize, but then the effects are lasting for 6 to 8 hours. So if you've overdosed, you've got 6 to 8 hours to get through. Oh my God, you know. Emergency thing there is take some CBD, because CBD, and take it as a vape. If you're using edibles, then you can reverse a lot of that effect. And there's another thing that you can buy off the internet called copaiba oil, which is a South American type oil, and that's really good at reversing the effects of cannabis overdose. So there are things to undo it. And I think if you were going to go on the oil or use edibles, I'd have something like that around, because I really don't recommend the overdose thing. It's horrible, it really is. But the mistake people make is they chomp down on their brownie, and an hour later they go, oh, I can't feel a thing, so have another one. Yeah. So they accidentally overdose and they pay the price for that. which is, again, it's not going to kill you, and you don't even need to go to A&E, but it's not pleasant.
Two more.
Sorry?
Two more short
Two more.
ones.
Yeah, just go, and then I think you have to. Yeah.
I was just wondering if you could give us a couple of suggestions for things I could read, like books, anything off the top of your head, for someone that's just like taking an interest in this kind of thing.
Yeah, I'll have a look for you. I've probably got some stuff on there, but I can't remember the actual titles of.
So I've got my granddad has like various disease illnesses, like Parkinson, short-term memory losses, and bad part. And I've got loads of medicine pills and stuff. And I really want to make him enjoy try CBD, see what it does, but he only believes what doctor says. So my thing, I don't want him to say stop that and try CBD. So just try the two together. Is there any bad association?
No, you can do those together. I mean,
just
yeah, it's a very good question, because there are a lot of herbal medications that will interact, like grapefruit seed extract. You can buy that in Holland and Barrett, and people take that for infections and so on. And it's quite effective, but there are certain drugs that it will interact with and have pretty bad effects. So not all herbal medications are safe with pharmaceuticals by a long shot, but I don't know of any interactions with anything with CBD. I was looking at what one this paper here basically. This is a research by research scientists, and he was saying, oh, the reason we used cannabidiol for psychosis is because it's such a safe thing to use. Yeah, so it really doesn't interact with any other drug. It's that's safe. Yeah, and start them off low, and I mean that's the problem with it is people, if they take too low a dose, they don't get a result. They just think, oh, I won't bother. But you just got to work out what's right for you. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mike.
Pleasure.
Thank you all for coming down to this event this evening. I found that highly informative, and I think if anyone wants to hang around a little bit more, we can have a chat about a bit more length. We'll probably go to the pub as well for a chicken pint after this. This is the start of a series of talks. We'll be announcing another talk, I think, in a couple of weeks. Got someone else with a lot of interesting information going to come down. So please, if you enjoyed it, I'm Dylan from Karma Coast. We're a local company. Me and my partner, we're actually in this building. Our little cannabis shop with that. If you enjoyed it, please spread the word about Karma Conversations, and come and stay around, talk to us. It's been really enjoyable, and I'm quite overwhelmed with the amount of people that turned up. So thank you so much again, and good night.